The bullet that killed Adelaide Parker's father tore through more than flesh and bone. It shattered her ability to trust any man who walked this earth. She was 19 years old when it happened, standing in the doorway of their small ranch house outside Fort Stanton, New Mexico, watching three men on horseback ride away into the dust-choked sunset of 1878. Her father lay bleeding on the porch steps, his life draining into the parched wood beneath him, all because he had refused to sell his water rights to a cattle baron who believed money could buy anything, including murder. Adelaide held him as he died, his calloused hands going cold in hers, his last words a whispered apology that she would be alone now. But she was not thinking about loneliness in that moment. She was thinking about the cruel laughter of those men, the way they had looked at her like she was nothing, like her father was nothing, like life itself meant nothing to them. The sheriff came 3 hours later. He took notes, asked questions, and left with promises that felt as empty as the desert air. No arrests were ever made. The cattle baron, a man named Garrison Cole, continued to prosper while Adelaide buried her father on a hillside overlooking the land he had loved. That was when the fear began. It started small, a quickening of her pulse when a male voice called out a greeting in town, a cold sweat when she had to conduct business at the general store. Within months, it had grown into something that controlled her life. She could barely stand to be in the same room as a man, any man, without her hands shaking and her breath coming in short, painful gasps. The sight of spurs or a gun belt could send her fleeing. The sound of men's laughter made her skin crawl with remembered terror. She kept the ranch running through sheer stubbornness, and the help of Maria Gonzalez, a widow from town who needed work and asked no questions about Adelaide's strange requests, that any hired hands be sent away, that all business be conducted through Maria, that Adelaide herself remain as isolated as possible from the world of men. For 2 years, this arrangement worked well enough. The small ranch produced enough to keep them fed. Adelaide lived like a ghost, haunting her own property, venturing into Fort Stanton only in the early morning hours when the streets were mostly empty, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, her movements quick and furtive. It was on one such morning in the spring of 1880 that she first saw Lucas Xavier. She had been kneeling beside a display of seed packets at the general store, mentally calculating whether she could afford both the corn and the bean seeds, when she became aware of someone standing nearby. Her body recognized the presence before her mind did masculine height, masculine weight, masculine existence, and she was on her feet and backing away before she could stop herself, the seed packets scattering across the floor. "Madam, I did not mean to startle you," a voice said, low and careful. Adelaide's back hit the shelf behind her. Her vision had tunneled the way it always did, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She could not look up, could not meet his eyes, could only stare at the floorboards and will herself not to run screaming into the street. "I will pick these up for you," the voice continued, still in that same gentle tone as if he were speaking to a spooked horse. "You do not need to worry about it." She heard him move, heard the rustle of the seed packets being gathered, and then he was standing again, but farther away than before. Through her peripheral vision, she could see he had stepped back several feet, giving her space. "I will put these on the counter for you," he said. "Mr. Jenkins can hold them until you are ready to purchase them." Adelaide managed a jerky nod, and then she did what she always did: she fled. Out the door into the street, not stopping until she reached the wagon where Maria waited, patient and understanding as always. "The same?" Maria asked quietly. "The same," Adelaide whispered, hating herself for her weakness, hating the world for making her this way. But something was different this time, though she could not identify what. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she replayed the encounter. The man had not laughed at her. He had not stepped closer despite her obvious distress. He had not demanded she look at him or speak to him. He had simply helped and then given her distance. It was such a small thing. It should not have mattered. But it did. She learned his name 3 weeks later, though she did not ask for it. Maria mentioned in passing that Lucas Xavier had taken a job at the Patterson Ranch, which bordered Adelaide's property to the east. He was a cowboy from Texas, skilled with horses and cattle, quiet in his manner, and well liked by those who worked alongside him. Adelaide absorbed this information with mounting dread. A neighbor, a man who would be working nearby, who she might encounter again. The thought made her stomach turn. Yet when she did encounter him again, it was he who made sure to give her warning. She had been mending the fence line on the eastern border of her property, a task she normally would have asked Maria to hire someone for, but money was tight and her stubbornness was strong. She was wrestling with a particularly difficult post when she heard a horse approaching. Panic seized her immediately. She dropped her tools and looked around for escape, but there was nothing but open range in all directions. The horse stopped while still a good distance away. "Miss Parker," the same voice from the general store called out. "I am Lucas Xavier from the Patterson Ranch. I saw you working and wanted to make sure you knew I would be riding this fence line. I will stay on my side of the boundary. You need not worry." Adelaide stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. "I will continue on now," he said, and she heard the horse begin to move again, following the fence line but maintaining that careful distance. She dared to glance up then, just for a moment. He was perhaps 25 years old, tall in the saddle, wearing the practical clothing of a working cowboy. His hat was pulled low, and he kept his gaze directed ahead, not toward her. As he rode past, separated from her by at least 40 feet and a barbed wire fence, she felt something unexpected. Not terror, though her heart was certainly racing. Not the nauseating fear that usually consumed her, but rather a strange sort of curiosity. This man who had gone out of his way, twice now, to make her feel safe. Over the following months, these distant encounters became routine. Lucas Xavier seemed to have an uncanny sense for when Adelaide would be working outside, and he always announced his presence from a distance, always maintained the boundary between them, always kept his word about staying on his side of the fence. Sometimes he would share news, cattle prices, weather predictions, mentions of problems with coyotes or rattlesnakes in the area. He spoke to the air, never requiring her to respond, never expressing frustration when she did not. And Adelaide, despite herself, began to listen for his voice, began to time her fence mending and water checking to coincide with his rounds. She learned things about him through these one-sided conversations. He had grown up on a ranch in West Texas. His father had died when he was young, leaving him and his mother to manage on their own. He loved horses with a passion that came through in every word when he spoke of them. He had a quiet sense of humor that occasionally surfaced in dry observations about the cattle he tended, or the other cowboys he worked with. Maria noticed the change in Adelaide, the way she no longer flinched quite so badly at every mention of the ranch hands they occasionally needed to hire, the way she sometimes stood at the window facing east, looking toward the Patterson property. "This Lucas Xavier," Maria said one evening as they prepared dinner together. "He seems like a good man." Adelaide's hands stilled in the bread, though she was kneading. "I would not know, but you listen when he talks to you. He talks at the sky, not at me, and yet you hear him." Adelaide said nothing, but her cheeks colored slightly. The first full year passed this way, season sliding into season, the careful dance across the fence line continuing without variation. Lucas never pushed for more, never tried to close the distance between them, never expressed impatience with the strange arrangement. Then came the day that changed things. Adelaide had been in town, a brief and terrifying trip to purchase supplies. She had been alone because Maria was ill, and there had been no choice but to go herself or go without flour and coffee for another week. She had rushed through her purchases, her anxiety mounting with every moment, and in her haste to leave, she had dropped her coin purse on the steps of the general store. She only realized it when she was halfway home, and the discovery made her want to weep. That purse contained most of the money she had scraped together, money she could not afford to lose. But the thought of going back, of facing the busy streets again, made her feel physically ill. She was sitting in the wagon, paralyzed by indecision, when she heard a horse approaching at a gallop. Terror flooded through her. She grabbed the reins, ready to drive the wagon forward recklessly, but then a familiar voice called out, "Miss Parker, wait, please." Lucas Xavier rode up alongside the wagon but kept a distance of several yards between them. He was breathing hard, his horse lathered from the run. "You dropped this in town," he said, holding up her coin purse. "I saw it happen as I was leaving the feed store. I wanted to catch you before you got too far." Adelaide stared at the purse, then at him, then back at the purse. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "I am going to lay it here on this rock," Lucas said, dismounting and placing the purse on a large stone beside the road. "You can get it after I ride on ahead." He did exactly as he said, mounting his horse again and riding past her, continuing down the road until he was nearly out of sight. Only then did Adelaide climb down from the wagon on shaking legs and retrieve her purse. She looked down the road to where he had stopped, waiting to make sure she had gotten it safely. And for the first time in 2 years, she raised her hand in a gesture of thanks. She saw him nod in acknowledgement, and then he turned and rode away. That night, Adelaide lay awake for hours, her mind churning. This man had ridden hard to return her money. He could have kept it, she would never have known it was him who found it. He could have approached her directly, used the situation to force interaction. But instead, he had done what he always did. He had helped and then given her space. The question that kept her awake was simple and terrifying. Why, she asked Maria the next morning. Why would a man be so patient with someone like me? Maria looked up from the eggs she was frying. "What do you mean, someone like you? Broken, afraid, unable to function like a normal person." "You are not broken," Maria said firmly. "You are hurt. There is a difference." But why would he care? What could he possibly want from someone who cannot even look at him? Maria was quiet for a moment, considering. Perhaps he wants nothing except to be kind. Perhaps he sees your fear and respects it. Or perhaps... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Perhaps he sees who you are beneath the fear, and that person is worth being patient for. The idea seemed absurd to Adelaide. Who was she beneath the fear? She could barely remember anymore. The girl she had been before her father's murder felt like a stranger, someone from a dream. But over the following weeks, she found herself thinking about Maria's words. Found herself wondering who Lucas Xavier saw when he looked toward her from across the fence line. Found herself wishing, in her most secret heart, that she could be that person, whoever she was. The second year brought subtle changes. Adelaide began to speak back, at first just a word or two in response to Lucas's comments about the weather. Then gradually more a question about his horses, an opinion about the best way to repair a certain type of fence damage, a warning about a gully that washed out in heavy rain. They were still separated by distance and wire, still never looking directly at each other, but they were having conversations now. real conversations. Lucas learned that Adelaide had a sharp mind for the practical matters of ranching, that she had a dry wit that matched his own, that she loved this harsh land with a fierceness that surprised him. Adelaide learned that Lucas had dreams of owning his own place someday, that he sent money to his mother back in Texas every month, that he believed honesty and hard work mattered more than cleverness or charm. They talked about books. Both had read the same adventure novels from the lending library in Fort Stanton. They talked about horses. Adelaide had two that she had raised from foals. They talked about everything except the thing that hung between them, the reason for the distance Adelaide required. Until the day she told him. It was late summer, the heat oppressive even in the shade. Adelaide had been checking the water level in the stock tank near the eastern fence when Lucas rode up on his usual rounds. They had been discussing a mutual acquaintance in town when Adelaide suddenly heard herself say, "My father was murdered." Lucas's horse came to a halt. She could feel his attention sharpen, though she kept her gaze fixed on the water tank. "I am very sorry," he said quietly. "I watched it happen. I watched 3 men shoot him because he would not sell them what they wanted." Her voice was flat, emotionless, the only way she could get the words out. "They were never punished. They are still free, still living their lives while my father is in the ground. Miss Parker, I know their faces. I know their voices. I know the way they laughed when they rode away." Her hands were shaking now. "And I see them in every man I encounter. I hear them in every male voice. I feel the same helplessness, the same terror, the same certainty that I am not safe, that I will never be safe again." The silence that followed was long. Adelaide waited for judgment, for dismissal, for the irritation that surely had to come. What man would want to continue this strange association now that he knew how deeply her damage ran? But when Lucas spoke, his voice was gentle. "Thank you for telling me." She blinked in surprise. "I have wondered," he continued, "what could make a strong woman like you so afraid. I am grateful that you trusted me with the truth." "I am not strong," Adelaide said bitterly. "I am a coward. You are here, are you not? Working this ranch alone, surviving, persisting despite what was done to you. That is not cowardice, Miss Parker. That is courage of the highest order." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had shed in months. "I cannot even look at you. That does not matter to me." "How can it not matter? What kind of friendship is this where one person cannot bear the sight of the other?" "The kind that matters most," Lucas said simply. "The kind built on respect and patience and truth." And that was when Adelaide began, just barely, to hope. The second year turned into the third, and the careful friendship deepened into something neither of them named but both recognized. Adelaide found herself thinking about Lucas, constantly wondering what he was doing, whether he had managed to break that difficult colt he had mentioned, if he had received a letter from his mother. She realized she knew the sound of his horse's hoofbeats, could distinguish them from any other rider's approach. Lucas, for his part, had long ago admitted to himself that he had fallen in love with the woman on the other side of the fence. Not despite her fear, but including it, accepting it as part of who she was right now, in this moment. He loved her sharp mind, her resilience, her honesty. He loved the rare moments when she laughed at something he said, the sound bright and startled as if she had surprised herself. He had never pushed, never demanded more than she could give, because he understood something important. Adelaide's healing was not about him. It was not his to force or control or hurry along. All he could do was be steady, be present, be worthy of her trust if and when she chose to give it. But he was, after all, only human. And there were moments when the distance between them felt almost unbearable. It was near the end of the third year, on a cool October morning, when everything changed. Adelaide had been working on the fence line, replacing a broken post when she heard riders approaching. Multiple riders moving fast. Her heart lurched into her throat. She turned, looking for escape, but they were coming from the direction of her ranch house, cutting off that route. Panic overwhelmed reason. She dropped her tools and began to run along the fence line, following it east, her only thought to put distance between herself and those approaching riders. She heard them change direction, coming after her, and her panic escalated into full terror. Her boot caught on a rock and she went down hard, pain shooting through her ankle. She scrambled to get up, but the ankle would not hold her weight. The riders were close now. She could hear men's voices shouting, though she could not make out words over the roaring in her ears. And then another horse, coming from the east, moving faster than seemed possible. Lucas vaulted from the saddle before his horse had fully stopped, positioning himself between Adelaide and the approaching riders. "That is far enough," he said, his voice hard in a way Adelaide had never heard before. The riders pulled up. There were 3 of them, and Adelaide's terror spiked even higher. 3 men like before, always 3. "We are looking for strays that broke through the fence," one of them said, irritated. "They headed this way." "Then you can look for them from over there," Lucas said, not moving. "This is Miss Parker's land and you are not welcome on it." "We were not asking permission, and I am not offering it. Turn your horses around and leave. Now." Something in Lucas's voice, or perhaps in his stance, convinced them. The riders exchanged glances, then wheeled their horses and rode back the way they had come. Lucas watched until they were out of sight, then turned to Adelaide. She was still on the ground, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Miss Parker," he said softly. "Adelaide, you are safe now, they are gone." She could not respond, could not do anything but shake. "I am going to come closer," Lucas said. "Just close enough to help you up. Is that all right?" She managed a tiny nod, though everything in her screamed to refuse, to run, to hide. Lucas approached slowly, every movement telegraphed and careful. He stopped a few feet away and crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. "I think you hurt your ankle," he said. "Can you stand on it?" Adelaide tried and gasped at the pain. "I need to get you back to your house," Lucas said. "I can bring my horse closer, help you mount. I will not ride with you. I will walk alongside." It took all of Adelaide's courage to agree, but she did. Lucas brought his horse over, then stood facing away while she used the stirrup to pull herself up into the saddle. True to his word, he walked beside the horse, leading it by the reins, never looking at her, maintaining what distance he could while still helping her. Maria met them at the ranch house, alerted by Adelaide's absence. Together, she and Lucas got Adelaide inside and onto the settee in the front room. Lucas then immediately stepped back outside, giving Adelaide space to breathe, to calm down. But as Maria examined her swollen ankle and Adelaide's panic began to subside, replaced by throbbing pain and exhaustion, she realized something. Lucas had touched her, not directly, not skin to skin, but his hands had been on the reins close to hers. His shoulder had brushed against her boot as he helped her balance, and she had not shattered, she had not screamed. She had been too frightened and in too much pain to fully register it in the moment, but now, sitting in her quiet house, she understood the significance. "He put himself between you and those men," Maria said quietly as she wrapped Adelaide's ankle. "Without hesitation, I know. He was ready to fight them if necessary, I know." "Adelaide," Maria said, her hands stilling, "this man loves you." Adelaide closed her eyes. "I know that too." "And you? How do you feel about him?" It was the question Adelaide had been avoiding for months, maybe longer. The answer terrified her almost as much as her fear of men did, because it represented vulnerability of a different kind. but it was also the truth, undeniable and strong. "I love him," she whispered. "I love him, and it is the most frightening thing I have ever felt." Lucas did not return to the fence line for 3 days, giving Adelaide time to recover and perhaps to process what had happened. When he finally did appear, on his usual rounds, Adelaide was waiting for him. She stood on her side of the fence, her weight balanced carefully on her still tender ankle, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "Lucas," she called out the first time she had initiated contact, the first time she had used his given name. He stopped his horse immediately. "Miss Parker, how is your ankle?" "Better. I wanted to thank you for what you did." "There is no need for thanks." "Anyone would have." "No," Adelaide interrupted. "Not anyone. You have been patient with me for 3 years. You have never pushed, never demanded, never made me feel ashamed of my fear. And when I needed you, you were there without hesitation." Lucas said nothing, waiting. Adelaide took a shaking breath. "I want to try something. I do not know if I can do it, but I want to try." "What do you want to try?" "I want to look at you." She heard his sharp intake of breath. "You do not have to," he began. "I know, but I want to." It was the hardest thing she had ever done, harder than burying her father, harder than learning to survive on her own. Adelaide forced her gaze up from the ground, up past the fence line, up past the horse's legs and body, up to where Lucas sat in the saddle. Her vision swam. Her pulse roared in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to look away, to run, to hide. But she kept looking. Lucas Xavier had a weathered face, tanned from years in the sun. His hair was brown, darker than she had imagined. His eyes, she could not quite make out their color from this distance, but they were looking at her with such gentleness that it made her chest ache. He was not her father's killers. He was not those men who had chased her yesterday. He was just Lucas, the man who had spoken to her across a fence for 3 years, who had shared his dreams and his jokes, who had returned her coin purse and protected her from danger. "Adelaide," he said softly, and the sound of her name in his voice made her realize she was crying. "I see you," she managed to say. "I am looking at you, and I am still standing here. You are one of the bravest people I have ever known." They stayed like that for several minutes, simply looking at each other across the fence line that had separated them for so long. Finally, Adelaide's nerve broke and she had to look away, but it was not a retreat, it was just a pause. "That is enough for today," she said, wiping her eyes. "That is more than enough," Lucas agreed. "That is extraordinary." Over the following weeks, Adelaide practiced looking at Lucas. Each time it got a little easier, each time she could hold his gaze a little longer. She began to notice details: the scar on his chin, the way he smiled crookedly, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes. And as her terror slowly, incrementally loosened its grip, other feelings had room to grow. The love she felt for him deepened, became more acute. She found herself wanting more than these distant conversations. She wanted to know what his voice sounded like up close. She wanted to see the color of his eyes clearly. She wanted, God help her, to know what it would feel like to be near him without the fence between them. But that step still seemed impossibly far. Looking was one thing. Proximity was another entirely. It was Maria who suggested the picnic. "Set up a blanket on your side of the fence," she said. "Let him sit on his side. You can eat together, talk together, but with the fence still there. A smaller distance, but still safe." The idea terrified and thrilled Adelaide in equal measure. When she suggested it to Lucas, his voice went rough with emotion. "I would like that very much," he said. "Whenever you are ready." They chose a Sunday in late November, when the weather was cool but not cold. Adelaide spread a blanket on her side of the fence, and Lucas did the same on his. They sat with the barbed wire between them, perhaps 4 feet apart, and shared the food Maria had helped prepare. It was awkward at first. The proximity made Adelaide's hands shake, made her breathing shallow. But Lucas filled the silence with easy talk about his week, about a letter from his mother, about the foal that had been born at the Patterson ranch. Gradually, Adelaide relaxed enough to eat, to respond, to laugh at his stories. "May I ask you something?" Lucas said after they had been sitting for nearly an hour. "Yes." "What do you want, Adelaide? For your future, I mean. If you could have anything, what would it be?" Adelaide considered the question. A year ago, she would have said she wanted only to be left alone to survive in her isolated safety. But that was not true anymore. "I want to be whole again," she said slowly. "Or if not whole, then at least functional. I want to live without this constant fear. I want to be able to go into town without feeling like I might die. I want—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want to be able to be close to someone I care about without terror consuming me." "Those are good wants," Lucas said quietly. "What about you? What do you want?" "I want my own place someday. A small ranch, good horses, a simple life." He hesitated, then continued. "And I want to spend that life with someone who understands that love is not about possession or control, someone strong and honest and brave." He did not say someone like you, but Adelaide heard it anyway. "Lucas," she said, "if I am ever able to be the kind of person who could stand beside you without this fear, would you still want me? Even knowing how broken I have been, you are not broken," he said firmly. "And yes. 1,000 times yes." The picnics became a regular occurrence, every Sunday that weather permitted. 4 feet apart, separated by wire and wood, Adelaide and Lucas courted in their own strange way. They talked about everything: childhood memories, dreams for the future, opinions on everything from politics to poetry. Adelaide told him about her mother, who had died when she was young, about her father who had been both parents to her, teaching her to rope and ride and run a ranch. Lucas told her about growing up poor, about learning young that hard work was the only currency that mattered, about his fierce pride in being able to support his mother now. As winter approached, they bundled in coats and blankets, their breath fogging in the cold air. Adelaide found that the fear, while still present, was no longer all-consuming. She could look at Lucas without panic now. She could listen to his voice, watch his expressions, feel fondness and longing instead of terror. But the fence remained between them, and some part of Adelaide worried that it always would, that she would never be brave enough to cross that final barrier. It was Lucas's mother who inadvertently forced the issue. In February, 3.5 years after that first encounter in the general store, Lucas received a telegram. His mother was ill, seriously so, and he needed to return to Texas immediately. He told Adelaide that evening, his voice strained with worry. "I do not know how long I will be gone." Weeks, certainly. Perhaps months if she needs significant care. Adelaide felt panic of an entirely different kind. The thought of Lucas being gone, of losing these daily moments that had become the center of her world, was unbearable. "I will wait for you," she said, "however long it takes." "I know you will. But Adelaide, I need to say something before I go," in case his voice caught. "In case I do not get another chance. Do not say that. I have to. I love you. I have loved you for years now. I know the circumstances are not what anyone would choose, and I am not asking for anything you cannot give, but I needed you to know." Adelaide's throat tightened. "I love you too, so much that it frightens me almost as much as everything else does." "When I come back," Lucas said, "if you are willing, I would like to try something." "What?" "I would like to try being on the same side of the fence. Even if we have to start with 10 feet apart, even if it takes another 3 years to close that distance. I want to work toward a future where I can court you properly, where maybe someday I could hold your hand, Tears streamed down Adelaide's face. "I want that too. I want to try." Lucas left the next morning, and the world felt emptier without him. Adelaide threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from worry about his mother and longing for his presence. Maria watched her pace the house and finally said what they were both thinking. "When he returns, you need to be ready to take the next step." "I do not know if I can." "You can. You have already come so far." Looking at him, sitting near him, "These things you thought impossible you have done. The rest is just more of the same courage." "But what if I fail? What if he tries to stand close to me and I cannot bear it? What if I hurt him by recoiling?" "Then you try again," Maria said firmly, "and again, until your heart learns what your mind already knows, that this man would never harm you." Lucas was gone for 6 weeks. They were the longest 6 weeks of Adelaide's life, but they were also, in a strange way, necessary. Because Adelaide spent that time preparing herself, working up her courage, making decisions. She practiced standing in the same room with ranch hands Maria hired for various tasks, forcing herself to stay even when her instincts screamed to flee. She went into town more often, challenging herself to walk past groups of men, to conduct her own business at the general store. Each small victory built on the last, and while the fear never disappeared entirely, she learned that she could function despite it. She was waiting at the fence line when Lucas returned in late March, the first hints of spring greening the landscape. He rode up slowly, and Adelaide saw immediately that the time away had aged him. His face was drawn with exhaustion and grief. "Your mother?" she asked, already knowing from his expression. "She passed 2 weeks ago. I stayed to settle her affairs, to sell her house and distribute her things as she wanted." "I am so sorry, Lucas." They sat on opposite sides of the fence, and Lucas talked about his mother's last days, about her funeral, about the strange emptiness of being an orphan even at 28 years old. Adelaide listened, aching with the need to comfort him, to put her arms around him and let him grieve against her shoulder, but she could not yet. "My mother knew about you," Lucas said eventually. "I wrote to her about you over the years. In one of her last letters, she said she hoped she would live long enough to meet the woman who had taught her son what real patience looked like. She said any woman worth waiting 3 years for must be extraordinary." Adelaide wiped tears from her cheeks. "I wish I could have met her. She left me some money, not a fortune, but enough to make a down payment on land if I am careful." Lucas looked at Adelaide directly. "I have been thinking about what I want to do with it." "What do you want to do?" "There is a parcel for sale that borders both your ranch and the Patterson place. It is small, just enough for a modest house and a few horses. I have been thinking about buying it, about staying here near you while we figure out what comes next for us, if there is in us, if you still want there to be." Adelaide's heart swelled. "I want there to be. And Lucas, I want to try something right now." "What?" "I want to try being on the same side of the fence." She saw him go very still. "Are you certain?" "No, but I want to try anyway." Her hands shook as she walked along the fence to the gate that separated their properties, a gate they had never used in 3 years. She opened it, the hinges creaking from disuse, and stepped through onto the Patterson Ranch land where Lucas stood. Immediately, panic surged. She was on his side now, in his space with no barrier between them. Lucas was perhaps 15 feet away, but it felt like inches. Her breathing came fast and shallow. "I am right here," Lucas said quietly. "You are safe. I will not move unless you ask me to." Adelaide forced herself to stay, to not flee back through the gate. She counted her breaths, trying to slow them. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Talk to me," she gasped. "Please just talk." And Lucas did. He talked about the land he wanted to buy, about the house he would build, about the horses he would raise. His voice was steady and calm, a lifeline in the storm of her panic. Gradually, very gradually, Adelaide's terror receded to mere acute anxiety. She was still on the wrong side of the fence, still in proximity to a man, but she had not died. She had not shattered. She was still standing. "I am all right," she said, surprised by the truth of it. "I mean, I am terrified, but I am all right. You are doing wonderfully." They stood like that for perhaps 10 minutes, Lucas talking occasionally, Adelaide focusing on breathing and staying present. Finally, her legs began to shake from the sustained tension. "I need to go back now," she said. "Of course." Adelaide retreated through the gate, back to her own property, and the relief was immediate. But so was something else: pride. She had done it. She had stood on the same side of the fence as Lucas, with nothing between them, and survived. It was a beginning. Over the following weeks, as Lucas finalized the purchase of his land and began building his house, Adelaide practiced. Every few days, she would cross through the gate, stand with Lucas on the same side, and endure the anxiety until it became bearable. Each time she was able to stay a little longer, tolerate the proximity a little better, and each time Lucas was patient, never moving toward her, never expressing frustration with the slow pace, never making her feel ashamed of her fear. "I bought the land," he told her one day in April, his voice warm with satisfaction. "It is official. I am your neighbor now." Adelaide smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I am glad. The house will be small," he continued. "Just 3 rooms to start, but it will be mine." "Ours if someday he stopped, shaking his head. "I am getting ahead of myself." But Adelaide understood what he meant. A house that could be theirs if she could ever overcome this final barrier. The house took shape over the late spring and early summer. Lucas did much of the work himself, with occasional help from friends at the Patterson Ranch. Adelaide watched from her own property sometimes, marveling at his skill, at the way the simple structure gradually became a home. And as she watched, she imagined what it might be like to walk through that door with him, to sit at a table together without a fence between them, to build a life in that small house, to wake up each morning knowing she was safe and loved. The wanting was so strong it hurt. In June, Adelaide made a decision. She asked Lucas to meet her at their usual spot by the fence, but this time she had something specific in mind. "I want to try standing closer," she said without preamble. "Not touching, but closer than we have been." Lucas's expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the hope in his eyes. "How close? I do not know. We will figure it out together." They both passed through the gate, standing on neutral ground between their properties. Lucas waited while Adelaide approached, one slow step at a time. 5 feet apart, 4 feet, 3 at 3 feet, Adelaide's anxiety spiked hard. She could smell him from here, soap and leather and sun-warmed skin. The proximity felt overwhelming. "Stop," she gasped, and Lucas froze. "Right here?" he asked. "Right here." They stood 3 feet apart, and Adelaide fought her fear with every tool she had learned. Lucas was safe. Lucas had never hurt her. Lucas had waited 3 years for this moment and would wait 3 more if she asked him to. "Tell me about your house," she said, needing distraction. Lucas described the kitchen he had built, the fireplace that had given him trouble, the view from the front window. His voice wrapped around Adelaide like a blanket, familiar and comforting. After a while, she realized her panic had subsided to something manageable. She was standing 3 feet from a man, and she was all right. "Lucas," she said softly. "Yes, thank you for waiting. You are worth every moment." They practiced this new distance over the following weeks, 3 feet apart, then gradually 2 feet, then 18 inches. Each reduction in space required Adelaide to marshal all her courage, but each time, Lucas's patient presence made it possible. It was a hot day in July. Nearly 3.5 years since that first encounter in the general store, when Adelaide decided she was ready for the next step. They were standing their usual 18 inches apart, talking about nothing in particular when Adelaide said, "I want to try holding your hand." Lucas went very still. "Adelaide, I know it is a big step, maybe too big, but I want to try. We do not have to rush. I am not rushing. I have been thinking about this for weeks." She took a shaking breath. "I want to know what it feels like to touch you. I want to stop being so afraid that I cannot even hold the hand of the man I love." Lucas's eyes shone with emotion. "Tell me what you need me to do. Just stand still. Let me be the one to initiate it." Adelaide stared at Lucas's hand, hanging relaxed at his side. It was a working man's hand, calloused and strong, tanned from the sun. She tried to imagine what it would feel like to touch it, to have his fingers close around hers. Terror and longing warred in her chest. She lifted her hand, extending it toward his. The distance seemed infinite. Her hand shook violently. "You do not have to do this," Lucas said gently. "I know, but I want to." Adelaide closed her eyes, unable to watch, and reached forward until she felt her fingertips brush against his palm. The panic was immediate and overwhelming. She jerked her hand back, gasping, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. "I am sorry," she choked out. "I cannot, you did it," Lucas said, his voice rough. "Adelaide, you touched me. Even for just a second, you did it." She opened her eyes and saw that he was right. She had touched him. It had been brief and she had panicked, but she had done it. "Can we try again?" she asked. "As many times as you need." They tried again, and again. Each time, Adelaide managed to maintain contact for a few seconds longer before the fear drove her back. But she did not give up, and neither did Lucas. Finally, on the fifth attempt, Adelaide pressed her palm against his and forced herself to hold still. The terror was there, screaming at her to flee, but underneath it was something else. The warmth of his skin, the slight roughness of his calluses. The sense of connection, of being literally in touch with this man she loved. "I am holding your hand," she whispered, awed. "You are," Lucas said, and his voice was thick with emotion. They stood like that for perhaps 30 seconds before Adelaide had to pull away, overwhelmed. But it was a beginning. It was proof that she could do this, that her fear did not have to rule her forever. Over the following weeks, holding hands became easier. They progressed from brief touches to being able to stand hand in hand for several minutes at a time. Adelaide marveled at how normal it began to feel, how the panic gradually lessened until it was just a background hum rather than a consuming roar. "I never thought I would be able to do this," she told Lucas one evening as they stood together, fingers intertwined. 3 years ago, I could not even imagine being this close to anyone." "You have worked hard for this," Lucas said. "You have been so brave, not brave, just stubborn." "Brave," he insisted. "Stubbornness is refusing to try. Bravery is trying even when you are terrified." In August, Lucas finished his house and officially moved in. Adelaide came to see it, walking through the rooms with wonder, imagining what it would be like to live here, to share this space with him. "What do you think?" Lucas asked, watching her anxiously. "I think it is perfect," Adelaide said honestly. "I think you built something solid and good, just like everything else you do." That night, as she lay in her own bed in her own house, Adelaide thought about the future. For the first time in years, she could actually envision one. A life with Lucas, partnership and love. Maybe children someday if she could overcome her fears enough to make that possible. It still seemed impossibly far, but it no longer seemed impossible. September brought cooler weather and a new challenge. Lucas asked Adelaide if she would have dinner with him in his house, just the two of them. The thought of being enclosed in a space with him, of not being able to flee easily if she needed to, brought back echoes of her old panic. But she also knew this was a necessary step. She could not build a life with Lucas if she could only tolerate his presence outdoors with clear escape routes. "Yes," she said, despite her fear. "I would like that." Maria helped her prepare, both practically and emotionally. "You can leave at any time," she reminded Adelaide. "You are choosing to be there. That is what makes it safe." The evening of the dinner, Adelaide dressed carefully, wearing one of her better dresses, and walked the short distance to Lucas's house. He met her at the door, and she could see he had made an effort to clean shirt, hair neatly combed, the small table set with care. "Come in," he said, stepping back to give her room. Adelaide crossed the threshold, and for a moment panic threatened to overwhelm her. She was inside in an enclosed space with a man. Every instinct screamed danger, but it was Lucas. Lucas who had waited 3 years. Lucas who had never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel anything but safe. She focused on breathing, on looking around the room, on grounding herself in the present rather than the past. "You all right?" Lucas asked quietly. "Yes, or I will be in a moment." He had made a simple meal, stew and bread, nothing fancy, but it smelled wonderful. They sat at the small table, and Lucas served them both, keeping up a steady stream of easy conversation that helped Adelaide relax. As they ate, Adelaide found herself enjoying the domesticity of it. The clink of spoons against bowls, the warmth of the room, the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone she loved. This was what normal people did. This was what she had thought she would never have again. "Thank you for coming," Lucas said, "for trusting me this much." "Thank you for being trustworthy," Adelaide replied, "for making it possible to trust again." After dinner, they sat in the small front room in chairs positioned at a comfortable distance. Lucas talked about his plans for the property, about the horses he hoped to acquire. Adelaide talked about her ranch, about some repairs she wanted to make to the barn. It was ordinary conversation, the kind any couple might have, and that ordinariness felt precious beyond words. When Adelaide finally left, several hours later, she realized she had spent an entire evening in an enclosed space with a man and had not fled, had not panicked beyond that initial moment. It was another victory, another piece of her life she was reclaiming. The weeks that followed brought more dinners, more time spent in Lucas's house, or working side by side on their neighboring properties. They held hands regularly now, and Adelaide had even managed to let Lucas put his arm around her shoulders a few times, though that still pushed the boundaries of her comfort. But there was one thing they had not yet done, one intimacy they had not approached: kissing. The thought of it terrified and thrilled Adelaide in equal measure. To be that close to someone, to be that vulnerable, seemed almost beyond her capabilities. And yet she wanted it. She wanted to know what it would be like to kiss the man she loved, to express her feelings in that physical way. It was late October, almost exactly 3 years since that day Lucas had protected her from the riders, when Adelaide decided she was ready to try. They were standing outside Lucas's house, hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Adelaide turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Lucas," she said, "I want to kiss you." His eyes widened. "Adelaide, we do not have to, I know, but I want to, if you are willing to be patient with me while I figure out how." "I would wait another 3 years for that," Lucas said softly. "I would wait forever." Adelaide moved closer until they were nearly touching, separated by just inches. Being this close still made her anxious, but it was manageable now, familiar. "I might panic," she warned. "I might have to stop." "That is all right, we will go at your pace." Adelaide took a deep breath and leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Her lips brushed against his, feather light, and for a moment it was wonderful, warm and soft and exactly right. Then the fear hit, irrational and consuming. She jerked back, gasping. Lucas held very still, making no move toward her. "You all right? Give me a moment," Adelaide managed. She counted breaths, reminding herself where she was, who she was with. This was Lucas. This was safe. This was what she wanted. When her panic subsided, she tried again. This time, she managed to keep her lips against his for several seconds before the fear drove her back. "I am sorry," she said. "I want to do this, but my body will not cooperate." "You are doing wonderfully," Lucas assured her. "That was more than I ever expected, more than enough." But it was not enough for Adelaide. She was tired of her fear limiting her, tired of the past controlling her present. She wanted this. She wanted to be able to kiss the man she loved without terror intervening. "Again," she said stubbornly. They tried again. And again. Each time, Adelaide managed to sustain the kiss a little longer, to focus a little more on the pleasure and a little less on the panic. Lucas was patient and gentle, letting her control everything, never pushing for more than she could give. Finally, on the 6th or 7th attempt, something shifted. The kiss lasted more than a few seconds, deepened into something real and meaningful, and Adelaide felt not panic but a wave of love so strong it brought tears to her eyes. When they finally parted, they were both breathing hard. "That was," Lucas began, then seemed unable to find words. "Worth waiting 3 years for," Adelaide suggested, smiling through her tears. "Worth waiting a lifetime for." They stood together as the sun finished setting, holding each other carefully, and Adelaide felt something she had not felt in years. Hope for a real future. A future where she was not defined by her fear, where she could love and be loved without limitation. As autumn turned toward winter, Adelaide and Lucas continued to grow closer. The physical intimacy that had once seemed impossible became gradually easier. They kissed often now, and Adelaide had learned to let Lucas hold her, to rest her head on his shoulder, to accept comfort and affection without panic. But they both knew there was still one major step remaining. Marriage. The ultimate commitment, the ultimate trust. It was a cold December evening when Lucas broached the subject. They were sitting in his house, Adelaide tucked against his side on the small sofa he had built. "Adelaide," he said carefully, "I want to ask you something, but I want you to know there is no pressure. If you are not ready, we can wait. We can wait years if necessary." "Ask me," Adelaide said, though her heart was already racing because she knew what was coming. Lucas shifted so he could look at her directly. "I love you. I have loved you for years now, and I will love you for the rest of my life. I want to marry you, to build a life together, to wake up every morning knowing I get to spend another day with you. But I know marriage means a level of intimacy and closeness that might still be difficult for you. So I am asking, do you think you might ever be ready for that? And if so, would you be willing to marry me?" Adelaide felt tears spill down her cheeks. A year ago, even 6 months ago, she would have said no. The thought of marriage, with all it entailed, would have been too frightening to consider. But now, "I want to marry you," she said. "I am still afraid of some things, still working through some fears, but I trust you, Lucas. I trust you with my heart and my life. So yes, yes, I will marry you." Lucas pulled her close, and Adelaide felt his tears wet against her hair. They held each other for a long time, both overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. "When?" Lucas finally asked. "Whenever you are ready, even if that is years from now." Adelaide considered. Part of her wanted to wait, to make sure she was truly ready for everything marriage would mean. But another part of her, the part that was tired of letting fear rule her life, wanted to move forward. "Spring," she decided. "I want to marry you in the spring, when things are new and growing. That feels right." They were married in April of 1884, nearly 4 years after that first encounter in the general store. It was a small ceremony, held at the church in Fort Stanton, with just Maria and a few close friends in attendance. Adelaide wore a simple dress she and Maria had sewn together, and Lucas wore his best suit. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Adelaide held her breath, half expecting someone to stand, to say that a woman as broken as her had no business marrying. But the church remained silent, and the ceremony continued. Lucas took her hands gently when it came time for the vows. Adelaide looked into his eyes and said the words that bound them together, words she had never thought she would be able to say. I, Adelaide Parker, take you, Lucas Xavier, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, to trust you, to build a life with you. You have waited for me with patience and kindness, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. Lucas's vows were simple but heartfelt. I, Lucas Xavier, take you, Adelaide Parker, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to always be patient with you, to keep you safe, to love you exactly as you are. You are the strongest, bravest person I know, and I am honored beyond words that you would choose to share your life with me. When the preacher pronounced them married and told Lucas he could kiss his bride, Adelaide felt a momentary spike of panic, not because it was Lucas, but because it was such a public display. But then Lucas leaned in slowly, telegraphing his intentions, and kissed her softly, and Adelaide felt nothing but love. The wedding night was something Adelaide had worried about extensively. The physical intimacy that marriage traditionally involved seemed daunting, potentially overwhelming for someone with her history of fear. But she and Lucas had talked about it honestly in the weeks leading up to the wedding. We will go at your pace, Lucas had assured her. If you need time, we will take time. Marriage does not change what we already have, it just makes it official. That night, in Lucas's house that was now their house, they approached their marriage bed with care and communication. Adelaide was nervous, her old fears hovering at the edges, but Lucas was patient and gentle, and gradually she relaxed into his touch. It was not perfect. There were moments when panic threatened, when Adelaide had to ask Lucas to stop and give her time to breathe. But Lucas never expressed frustration, never made her feel inadequate. And when they finally came together fully as husband and wife, it felt like a victory, a reclaiming of something the violence against her father had tried to steal. Afterwards, lying in Lucas's arms, her husband's arms, she corrected herself. Adelaide felt a peace she had not known in years. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For waiting, for being patient, for loving me enough to let me heal at my own pace. Lucas kissed her forehead. Thank you for trusting me, for choosing me, for being brave enough to build a life despite everything that tried to break you. The first year of marriage brought challenges and adjustments, as all marriages do. There were still moments when Adelaide's fear surfaced unexpectedly, times when proximity or a sudden movement triggered her old panic. But each time, Lucas was understanding, and together they worked through it. Adelaide moved into Lucas's house, and they made it truly theirs, adding touches that reflected both of their personalities. Adelaide brought her father's books, which filled a shelf Lucas built specially for them. Lucas taught Adelaide more about training horses, and she discovered she had a gift for it. They combined their ranches, creating a modest but successful operation. The fence that had separated them for so long was taken down, the wire and posts repurposed for other projects. Sometimes Adelaide would stand where it had been and marvel at how far she had come from a woman who could not even look at a man to a wife working side by side with her husband. Maria continued to work for them, becoming more family than employee. She watched Adelaide bloom in her marriage with satisfaction, pleased to have been part of the healing process. 2 years into their marriage, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She worried about how pregnancy and childbirth would affect her fears, whether she could handle having a male child, whether her anxieties would somehow damage her baby. But Lucas was steadfast in his support, and Dr. Mitchell, the physician in Fort Stanton, was a kind older man who understood Adelaide's need for gentle handling. Together, they helped Adelaide navigate the pregnancy. Their son was born in the spring of 1886, a healthy baby boy with Lucas's dark hair and Adelaide's determined spirit. They named him Thomas, after Adelaide's father. Holding her son for the first time, Adelaide felt a fierce protectiveness that surprised her in its intensity. This tiny person was part her, part Lucas, a testament to their love and her healing. And while he was male, which she had worried might trigger her fears, she felt nothing but overwhelming love. "He is perfect," Lucas said, looking at his son with wonder. "He is ours," Adelaide agreed. "Our miracle." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler to young child, Adelaide discovered that motherhood suited her. The physical demands of caring for a baby, which she had worried might be triggering, instead felt natural and right. She nursed him, soothed him when he cried, rocked him to sleep, all without the panic she had once felt about physical closeness. Lucas was a devoted father, patient and playful, teaching Thomas about horses and ranching as he grew old enough to understand. Watching them together, Adelaide felt her heart swell with gratitude for the life she had managed to build despite everything. 3 years after Thomas was born, Adelaide had a daughter they named Mary. She was a bright, spirited child who kept them all on their toes. The house that had once seemed small now felt full and alive with the noise and chaos of family life. Sometimes, usually in the quiet hours after the children were asleep, Adelaide and Lucas would sit together on the porch and reflect on their journey. "Do you remember when I could not even look at you?" Adelaide asked one evening. "I remember," Lucas said, his arm around her shoulders. "I also remember thinking that if I could just be patient enough, if I could prove myself trustworthy enough, maybe you would give me a chance." "Did you ever doubt? Ever think about giving up?" "Never," Lucas said firmly. "Well, maybe in some of my darkest moments I worried that you would never be able to overcome your fear, but giving up on you was never an option. I loved you too much for that." Adelaide leaned against him, comfortable in his embrace in a way that still sometimes amazed her. "I used to think that what happened to my father broke something in me permanently, that I would never be whole again. And now I think maybe I am not the same as I was before. I still have moments when the old fear surfaces, but I am not broken, I am just different, and that is all right." "You are more than all right," Lucas said. "You are extraordinary." As the years passed, Adelaide's fears continued to diminish, though they never disappeared entirely. There were still occasional moments when a sudden movement or raised voice would trigger a flash of panic. But they became rarer, easier to manage, less defining of who she was. She and Lucas expanded their ranch, buying additional land when it became available, building a reputation for quality horses. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's way with animals. Mary proved to have her mother's head for business and her father's kind heart. When Thomas was 16 and Mary was 13, Adelaide and Lucas welcomed a surprise third child, another son they named James. His birth reminded Adelaide that life could still bring unexpected blessings, even when you thought your family was complete. The town of Fort Stanton grew and changed over the years. Some of the rough elements that had characterized the wild frontier gave way to more civilized society. The cattle baron who had ordered her father's death, Garrison Cole, died of a heart attack in 1891, unrepentant and unpunished. Adelaide had thought she would feel satisfaction at his death, but instead she felt mostly indifference. He no longer had power over her, had not for years. Maria remained with them until her own death in 1895, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. Adelaide mourned her deeply, this woman who had stood by her through the darkest times, who had believed in her capacity to heal when Adelaide herself had doubted. On what would have been their 20th wedding anniversary in 1904, Lucas arranged a special celebration. He took Adelaide back to the spot where the fence had once stood, where they had spent 3 years talking across the divide. "I wanted to bring you here," he said, "to remember where we started, to honor how far we have come." Adelaide looked around at the open land, no fence in sight, and thought about the terrified young woman she had been. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life. "You know what I remember most from those years?" she asked. "What? Your voice. Even when I could not look at you, even when I was too afraid to acknowledge your presence properly, I would listen to your voice. It was like a lifeline, proof that not all men were monsters, that kindness still existed in the world. I remember thinking that if I could just keep showing up, keep being steady, maybe eventually you would trust me enough to let me love you properly." "You waited 3 years just to hold my hand," Adelaide said, shaking her head in wonder. "What kind of man does that?" "The kind who knows that some things are worth waiting for," Lucas replied. "The kind who loves a woman enough to let her heal at her own pace." Adelaide took his hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing, though she would never take it for granted. "I want you to know that I do not regret any of it, not the waiting, not the fear, not even the pain, because all of it led us here, to this life we built together." "I do not regret it either," Lucas said, "though I wish your father had lived to see the woman you became, the life you built." "I think he would have liked you," Adelaide said softly. "I think he would have appreciated your patience, your integrity. He valued those qualities." They stood together in silence for a while, hands intertwined, reflecting on 2 decades of marriage, of partnership, of love that had overcome tremendous obstacles. As they walked back to the house they had shared for so many years, Adelaide thought about the story she would tell her grandchildren someday. About a cowboy who waited 3 years just to hold her hand. About fear that seemed insurmountable but was gradually overcome. About patience and trust and the healing power of steady, unfailing love. Thomas married in 1906 to a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. They gave Adelaide and Lucas their first grandchild, a girl named Adelaide in her grandmother's honor, the following year. Mary married a year after that to a doctor who had recently moved to Fort Stanton. James, the youngest, showed signs of becoming a gifted horse trainer like his father. Adelaide discovered that being a grandmother brought its own joys. Holding little Adelaide, watching Thomas be gentle and patient with his daughter, she saw the legacy of healing continuing. The violence that had shaped her life did not have to shape her grandchildren's. They could grow up knowing safety and love as the norm, not the exception. As Adelaide entered her 60s, her health remained good, though Lucas developed some arthritis that slowed him down. They adjusted their work accordingly, letting their children and grandchildren take on more of the ranch responsibilities while they transitioned into advisory roles. On a warm evening in the summer of 1914, 30 years after their wedding, Adelaide and Lucas sat on their porch watching the sunset. It was a ritual they had maintained for decades, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been like if we had never met?" Adelaide asked. Lucas considered the question. "I suppose I might have married eventually, had children, run a ranch, but it would not have been this life." It would not have had you in it, which means it would have been immeasurably poorer. I think about it sometimes, Adelaide admitted. If you had not been patient, if you had pushed or demanded or gotten frustrated with my fear, I might have spent my whole life alone. Might never have known this kind of happiness. Or you might have found it with someone else, Lucas said generously, but Adelaide shook her head. No, it had to be you. Someone else might have been kind, but they would not have had your particular patience, your understanding of what I needed. You were exactly the right person at exactly the right time. Lucas squeezed her hand. We were lucky to find each other. We were, Adelaide agreed. Though luck does not quite cover it, you worked for this, Lucas. You waited and worked and proved yourself trustworthy day after day for years. That is not luck. That is dedication. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Adelaide reflected on the fullness of her life. 3 children, 5 grandchildren, a successful ranch, and most importantly, a marriage built on patience, trust, and unwavering love. The fear that had once consumed her was barely a whisper now, surfacing only rarely in dreams or moments of stress. She had reclaimed her life, built something beautiful from the ashes of trauma. And she had done it alongside a man who had loved her enough to wait 3 years just to hold her hand. Looking at Lucas beside her, his hair gray now, his face lined with age but still kind, still patient, Adelaide felt a wave of love so strong it took her breath away. I love you, she said. I do not say it enough, but I love you more than words can express. I know, Lucas said, smiling. You show me every day in 1,000 small ways. And I love you too, Adelaide. More than I did the day we married, which I would not have thought possible. They sat together as twilight deepened into night, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the life they had built together through patience, faith, and love that refused to give up. And in that moment, Adelaide understood with perfect clarity that she had not just survived the trauma that had tried to destroy her, she had transcended it. Had built a life so full of love and joy, and meaning that the darkness that had once consumed her was now just a small shadow in a sun-filled room. The cowboy had waited 3 years to hold her hand, and in doing so, had given her back herself. Had shown her that trust could be rebuilt, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that patience and understanding could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. It was a gift beyond price, and Adelaide would be grateful for it every remaining day of her life. Years continued to pass gently for Adelaide and Lucas. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management, expanded to include more land and horses. Mary's husband became the most trusted doctor in Fort Stanton, known for his gentle manner with patients. James developed a breeding program for horses that gained recognition throughout New Mexico. Adelaide and Lucas, now in their 70s, spent their days in quiet contentment. They still sat together each evening, still held hands as naturally as breathing, still marveled at the life they had built together. When Lucas died peacefully in his sleep in 1920, at the age of 68, Adelaide grieved deeply but without despair. They had been married 36 years, had loved each other for 40. She had no regrets, no wishes that things had been different. He had been her miracle, her salvation, her greatest love. At his funeral, Adelaide spoke about the man who had waited 3 years just to hold her hand, who had shown her that patience and love could heal even the deepest wounds. She spoke without notes, her voice clear and strong, and there was not a dry eye in the church when she finished. Adelaide lived another 8 years after Lucas's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her. She remained sharp and engaged, telling stories about the early days of their ranch, about the wild frontier that New Mexico had once been, and most often, about the patient cowboy who had changed her life. When she died in 1928 at 70 years old, she was buried beside Lucas on the hillside overlooking their ranch, not far from where her father rested. The headstone reads simply, Adelaide Xavier, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she learned to trust again. The story of Adelaide and Lucas became part of the family lore, passed down through generations. The tale of a woman who had been so traumatized she could not bear the presence of men, and the cowboy who loved her enough to wait 3 years just to hold her hand. It was a story about patience and healing, about trust hard-won and love that overcame all obstacles. And it was a story with a happy ending, which is the best kind of all.